Welcome, educators. Thank you for being here today. Today we're here to talk about racial literacy. Dr. Tyrone Howard gives us an outstanding definition of racial literacy. That is, racial literacy refers to educators having the knowledge, skills, awareness, and dispositions to talk about race and racism. This video series is designed to be interactive. That means that you may share your opinions or thoughts in a Padlet, speak out loud in person, maybe you're still remote, kind of depends. That does, however, mean that the person that's in charge of the video, the one that has the ability to pause, you gotta be on your top game, because when you see the words, pause video, in big red letters underlined, you're gonna wanna pause that video. No fear, if you mess up, you can just go back a tiny bit and pause where you need to. Throughout the videos, you're gonna see an in-text citation up in the right-hand corner of the video. That's to make sure that we give credit where credit's due. It will also be available to you in a specific reference list outside of the video. I think that's all I have to say. So strap in and let's learn a little bit about racial literacy from a variety of different sources.
Let's start, first of all, by talking about the concept of diversity, since I would say it's language that we most often hear used when we're talking about bringing people together across cultural communities. So diversity is essentially about the quantitative representation of differences. It's about measuring how many women do we have within the workplace, how many people of color do we have on this board, how many people from the LGBTQ communities make up part of this society, and so much more. Essentially what we're doing when we're taking a look at diversity is measuring the representation of cultural communities in our society, in our organization, in our mix. Inclusion is about not only the quantitative representation of difference, but more importantly, it's about the qualitative experience around differences. That is to say, when we're talking about inclusion, what we're really focusing on is the extent to which people can bring their whole, true, authentic cultural selves into their interactions, whether that be at school, at work, in their personal interactions and relationships, and more.
Equity, often confused with equality, but equity basically means when all of our institutions are working the same for everyone. So that if you're African American and white, you would apply for a job and you wouldn't be seen as better if you were white with the same qualifications as someone who's black. Equity doesn't always mean the same. Giving people the same would be treating them equal, equality. But understanding what they need given the circumstances would be equity, so that they can have fairness, justice, and equal opportunity to interact with the system. When you're at that big concert or sporting event and you go to the bathroom, always a longer line for the ladies' room than the men's room. Equality would mean giving men and women the same number of stalls in their bathroom. Equity would mean offering the women's restroom maybe 3 times as many number of stalls. So racial equity would be when things like graduation rates, wealth, infant and maternal mortality can no longer be predicted by race. Because we know what causes those disparities is not people's race. It's the environment, the opportunity, and the access to interact with systems, or the interaction that's ineffective or over time disproportionately disadvantaging to certain groups over the others.
Let's start with race. Now, you may have heard someone say, race is a human construct, and that's true. Race is a mode of categorization that's based on physical appearance. So in the case of jelly beans, race is color. Because race is based on appearance, to some degree it's ascribed, meaning that people are assigned into racial categories based on what other people see. Race is a huge factor in daily life, but it isn't the whole picture. The term race does not capture the complexities of ethnicity. Ethnicity refers to the ethnic group or groups that a person belongs to. It's a part of a person's heritage and ancestry. In the case of jelly beans, ethnicity is like the flavor. Two people who are in the same racial group can still have very different ethnicities. For example, all of these are red, but this one is cinnamon and this one is cherry. Two people in the same racial group can, and often do, have very different backgrounds. Ethnicity is a huge part of identity formation and development, but it's still not the same as nationality. The word nationality refers to someone's national origin, the country where they hold citizenship. For jelly beans, it's like the bag that a bean comes from. People of the same race or ethnicity can come from all different nations, like the watermelon bean that's in Camo Mix and Kids Mix, or the lemon lime bean that's in all three. And nationality is flexible. If a person immigrates, their nationality can change.
According to Merriam-Webster, prejudice is the preconceived judgment or opinion that is not based on reason, experience, or fact. In other words, prejudice is an unfair opinion or feeling formed about someone without enough thought or knowledge.
According to civil rights fine law, to discriminate means to distinguish, single out, or make a distinction. In other words, discrimination refers to the treatment of people because of the group they belong to or the group we think they belong to. These groups included but aren't limited to groups such as race, gender, and class.
Lastly, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, racism means the belief that humans may be divided into separate and exclusive biological entities called races. That there is a causal link between inherited physical traits and traits of personality, intellect, morality, and other cultural and behavioral features. In other words, racist beliefs support the idea that physical traits, like the color of your skin, play a part in traits such as how smart you are and whether or not you are going to be a good person.
What's up, everybody? I'm Dr. CI, and I am back in the building to have a conversation with you today about implicit versus explicit bias. An implicit bias is a prejudice that turns into an action that is unconscious. You don't know that you are doing it, okay? An explicit bias is a conscious bias. It means that you know exactly what it is that you are doing, and that usually shows up when human beings are afraid. For example, in the module, they walked up to a young woman on the street and they said, "Tell us about a time when you've experienced implicit bias at work." And she said, "Well, I work in a warehouse, and I had a manager who would never subscribe me any hard work. And when I went up to him and asked him, 'Why don't you give me the same amount of work?' he said, 'Because I don't believe that women can lift heavy boxes.'" And she said that was his implicit bias. No, that is explicit. He knew for a fact that he didn't believe that women could lift boxes, therefore he prevented her from lifting boxes. Now, if she had went to him and he involuntarily said that he didn't realize he had done that, then it would have been unconscious. And there's a difference because an implicit bias can transfer to an explicit bias, but an explicit bias cannot transfer to an implicit bias. Let me give you an example of that. So we was working with a company and we did a pay equity analysis. What that means is we looked at gender, for example, to see if there was any difference between the way that men, women, and non-gender binary populations were paid within a company. What we found is that women were paid less for doing the same amount of work and having the same amount of experience. The director of HR was a woman. Most of the hiring managers and recruiters were women in that company. When we pointed out the pay equity analysis, they had no idea that they had been offering women lower salaries. And they fixed it. They went back and gave them equitable salaries. They had to change it. But we changed that bias from being implicit to now saying that it is explicit because you are conscious that you are doing it.
Intersectionality.
You may have heard this term used before, but what does it mean? And where did it come from? Let's start by introducing Kimberlé Crenshaw, a scholar, writer, professor, and civil rights advocate who coined the term herself in 1989. Her research and work in critical race theory has led to groundbreaking influences. Race and gender overlap to define one's experiences and identity. This is what is called intersectionality. Leah Thomas, founder of Intersectional Environmentalists, called on the environmental community to make a pledge to Black lives and commit to a journey of intersectional advocacy, a community where intersectionality plays an important role to advocate for both the people and the planet.
Hey, I'm Leah Thomas. I'm a writer, environmental activist, and the founder of Intersectional Environmentalist. Intersectionality to me, very heavily influenced by Kimberlé Crenshaw and intersectional theory, which she created. To me, it's kind of how our overlapping identities all intersect in some way, because we're dynamic human beings, and I'm just as much Black as I am a woman, and all of these other parts of my identity, including spirituality, sexuality, gender, on and on.
Intersectionality is a framework with which to approach the way that different folks navigate the world based on various identities. That can include race, ability, sex, gender, among other things as well. And it helps us to really pinpoint the different ways that folks navigate different spaces with varying levels of advantage and disadvantage.